Have you ever felt like you were always one step behind everyone else? What if one day, everything changed just like that? Emily Turner stared at her reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror. Her long brown hair was tied into a messy bun, and her eyes were a little too tired, a little too worn. The harsh fluorescent lights above flickered, adding to the tiredness that weighed down her entire body. This wasn't where she imagined herself to be at 28. A faint, mocking laugh echoed in her mind, the words she had heard over and over again, "You'll never make it. You're stuck here forever." They came from her family, her friends, and sometimes, even from the people she didn't know. They said it with pity, or sometimes worse, with cruel amusement. All her life, Emily had been told she'd never be good enough, that she'd always be stuck in the same cycle of low-paying jobs and debt. But today, things felt different. The ticking of the clock on the wall was a constant reminder that time was slipping by. It was already 9 p.m., and she should have been in bed, getting ready for her shift at the local retail store the next day. But she couldn't sleep. She couldn't ignore the feeling that had been growing inside her all day, a feeling of restlessness, of wanting something more. What if she could change it all? Emily had been working at this job for over 3 years now, and though she was thankful for it, thankful that it paid the bills and kept her afloat, it wasn't her dream. She never thought she'd end up in retail, never imagined she'd be spending her nights counting stock instead of building a future. But life had a way of throwing curveballs, and sometimes, dreams got pushed to the side. She tossed her phone on the counter and walked over to the small window in her apartment. The view was nothing spectacular. Just the parking lot of her building and the busy street where she had spent countless hours walking with no real direction. Cars passed by, people rushed home from work, and the world outside seemed so full of life, so full of promise. Yet here she was, stuck in the same routine, day after day. Emily couldn't help but think back to the family gathering just a week ago. It was supposed to be a happy time, but all it did was remind her of how far behind she had fallen. Her cousins, all living the lives they had dreamed of, gathered around the table, laughing and joking about their latest accomplishments. One had just bought a new house in the suburbs, another was driving a sleek new car, and one cousin even got a promotion to a high-paying corporate job. The more they talked, the more Emily felt the weight of her own failures. As they chatted about vacations to exotic places and their latest designer purchases, Emily smiled through gritted teeth. "Oh, I'm still working at the same place," she said, trying to sound casual, even though it felt like someone had just slapped her across the face. "But things are good. I'm getting by." "Good? Really?" Sarah, her cousin, had said with a laugh. "I mean, no offense, but that store's not exactly the kind of place you want to stay forever, right?" Emily had looked down at her plate, trying to hide the shame creeping up her neck. "Yeah, but it's a job," she had replied, her voice barely above a whisper. The words stung. But as she sat there that night, surrounded by family who didn't understand, something inside her snapped. No more. No more would she allow herself to feel small. No more would she let them think she was invisible. She was going to change. It was time for her to make a move. That night, she didn't sleep. Instead, she pulled up Google on her phone and started searching. It was all there, the life she had been dreaming of, just within reach. Real estate. Maybe it sounded crazy, but Emily had heard success stories of people who had turned nothing into something by flipping houses or renting out properties. Could she do it? Could she really change her life with a single move? The idea seemed almost impossible. How could someone like her, someone who didn't have connections, didn't have much money, ever be able to break into something like real estate? She didn't even know where to begin. But the more she thought about it, the more the idea took root. She didn't need to have everything figured out. She just needed to start. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind, soft and reassuring. "You can do anything you set your mind to, Emily. Never let anyone tell you otherwise." Emily knew that her grandmother had been right. She wasn't going to let this be her life forever. The mocking, the pity, the assumptions about her future, they would all stop now. She was going to take control of her destiny. She grabbed her phone and started searching for anything she could learn about getting started in real estate. The more she read, the more excited she became. It was like a door had opened, and for the first time in a long time, she could see a glimmer of hope. It was going to be hard, she knew that. She'd need to educate herself, save money, take risks. But the potential was there. Suddenly, Emily felt something she hadn't felt in years: hope. Hope that she could be the person she always wanted to be. Hope that, maybe, just maybe, she could turn her life around. She knew it wouldn't be easy. The road ahead would be long and there would be obstacles. But for the first time in a long time, Emily wasn't afraid. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough, she thought, smiling as she imagined herself speaking directly to the camera, sharing her journey with the world. This was it. This was the start of something new. And Emily was ready to take the leap. With a deep breath, she set her phone down on the counter. Tomorrow was a new day, and it was going to be the first step toward everything she had ever wanted. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Emily Turner's hands trembled slightly as she held her phone in the dim light of her apartment. The search results stared back at her, filled with articles about real estate investing, flipping houses, and stories of people who had started with nothing, just like her. She scrolled through pages of tips, success stories, and forums, feeling a mix of excitement and terror bubble up inside her. It was overwhelming, to say the least. How could she, someone who had spent most of her adult life struggling to pay rent and keep the lights on, ever break into this world? The jargon on the websites made her feel like a complete outsider. ARV? Equity? ROI, she muttered under her breath, struggling to understand what any of it meant. But something kept her going, a burning desire to learn and change her fate. For the first time in a long time, Emily felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, looking at the vast unknown below, but with a deep sense of purpose. She couldn't let fear stop her. She had always been scared of failure, but this time, failure wasn't an option. She had been raised in a small, modest town in Ohio where the idea of making a lot of money through real estate was almost unheard of. Her parents had worked hard to provide, but they never had the luxury of extra money for investments. Emily had always known there was something more out there for her, but the fear of the unknown had held her back for years. Maybe this is the way out, she thought, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and nerves. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind again, the woman who had always believed in her. If you want something bad enough, you'll find a way, Emily. Don't let anyone's doubts stop you. It was those words that made her believe she could actually do it. Her grandmother had been a source of inspiration her entire life, always encouraging her to aim higher, to reach beyond the limitations of their small-town life. And though her grandmother had passed away a few years ago, her voice still felt alive in Emily's heart, guiding her toward her next move. With determination settling in her chest, Emily decided to take the first step: education. If she was going to succeed, she had to understand the business. The next few days were a blur. Emily woke up early each morning with a cup of coffee in hand, diving into real estate books, watching online courses, and reading as much as she could about the ins and outs of property investing. Every time she hit a bump in the road, she pressed on, reminding herself that this was the only way she could change her life. Slowly but surely, things started to make sense. She learned that real estate investing wasn't just about buying and selling houses, it was about understanding the market, making smart decisions, and using your resources wisely. She read about finding undervalued properties, negotiating deals, and improving homes to increase their value. At first, it all seemed like a foreign language, but with each new piece of information, Emily began to feel more and more confident. In the evenings, after her long shifts at the retail store, Emily would lay in bed and dream about the future. She pictured herself walking through the door of a beautiful house she had just flipped, smiling as she realized that all her hard work had finally paid off. She saw herself traveling the world, no longer constrained by the tiny apartment or the dead-end job. But it wasn't all easy. There were moments of doubt, moments when she thought about giving up. Her friends and family still didn't understand. Her cousin Sarah, who had always been quick to point out Emily's lack of success, sent her a message one afternoon that made Emily's stomach turn. "Hey, I see you've been posting about real estate. Just be careful. I don't want you to get your hopes up. That's not something people like us can just dive into, you know." It stung, but Emily didn't let it break her. If anything, it fueled her determination even more. She wasn't doing this for Sarah. She wasn't doing this for anyone else. She was doing it for herself. For the person she knew she could become. For the dreams she had been holding on to for so long. One evening, while working her shift at the retail store, Emily met someone who would change her journey. His name was Greg Matthews, a middle-aged man who had been coming into the store for years, buying the same brand of tools every month. They'd exchanged small talk in passing, but one evening, Emily overheard Greg talking to one of the employees about real estate. "Yep, I flipped my first house 10 years ago, and it's been a wild ride ever since," Greg was saying, his voice low but confident. Emily's ears perked up, and without thinking, she approached him. "Excuse me, Greg, you mentioned flipping houses? Can I ask you about that?" she blurted out, trying to sound more confident than she felt. Greg looked at her with mild surprise, then gave her a warm smile. "Sure, kid. You interested in real estate?" I think so. I've been doing some research. I'm just not sure where to start," Emily admitted, her voice trembling slightly. Greg studied her for a moment, then nodded. "It's not an easy game, but if you're serious, I can help you out. We can grab coffee sometime, and I can give you some advice. Just remember, it's all about finding the right deals and knowing when to walk away." Emily's heart skipped a beat. This could be the opportunity she'd been waiting for. A few days later, Emily met Greg for coffee at a local diner. Greg had been in the business long enough to know the ins and outs. He didn't sugarcoat things. He warned her about the risks, the long hours, and the emotional toll it could take. But he also shared stories of his own journey, how he had started with nothing and built a successful real estate business from the ground up. His advice was simple but powerful. You need to learn how to see potential in something others overlook. Find the fixer-uppers, the diamonds in the rough, and make them shine. That night, Emily felt a surge of hope. Greg's words had given her a new sense of direction. She wasn't alone in this. There were people who had started just like her, with no money, no experience, just the belief that they could succeed if they kept pushing forward. As Emily lay in bed that night, she couldn't help but smile. She was no longer just dreaming about a better life. She was taking action. She had a plan, and she was moving forward, one step at a time. Tomorrow would be a new day, and Emily was ready for whatever it brought. Emily woke up with a start, the morning sunlight streaming through the cracks of her blinds. It was early, too early for her to feel awake, but the excitement buzzing in her chest pulled her out of bed. Today was the day. The day she would take her first step into the world of real estate. She had spent weeks learning everything she could. She had scoured the internet, read books, watched videos, and attended a few local meetups for beginners. Greg Matthews had even helped her navigate through some of the more complicated aspects of the business. Slowly but surely, the fog of confusion was beginning to lift. But despite all the preparation, Emily couldn't help but feel nervous. This wasn't some simple task. Real estate was a high-stakes game, and she didn't have the luxury of making mistakes. What if she made the wrong choice? What if she ended up losing everything? Focus, she whispered to herself, staring at her reflection in the mirror. You're ready. You can do this. She quickly got dressed in the best outfit she could manage, a simple blouse and jeans, a far cry from the professional attire she had imagined herself wearing when she first dreamed about working in real estate. But it was all she had, and today it would have to do. Emily grabbed her purse and headed out the door. Her first destination wasn't some fancy office building or a real estate agency. It was a rundown house on the outskirts of town that had caught her eye in a real estate listing the night before. It had been on the market for months, and the price was too low for the area it was in. Her heart pounded as she drove through the familiar streets of her small town. This was it. She was going to see her first potential investment. The house wasn't much to look at, a single-story property with faded siding and an overgrown front yard. The windows were cracked, and the roof looked like it hadn't been touched in years. But as Emily parked in front of the house, she felt a spark of possibility. Greg had told her to look beyond the surface, to see potential where others saw problems. This house, with all its flaws, was exactly what he had meant. She stepped out of the car, taking in the neighborhood around her. The area was quiet, filled with older homes that had seen better days. It wasn't a wealthy part of town, but it was safe and close to schools and shopping, exactly the kind of place a young family might be looking for, given the right improvements. Taking a deep breath, Emily walked up to the front door. She had scheduled a tour with the realtor, a middle-aged man named Brian who greeted her with a polite but skeptical look. "You're interested in this place?" Brian asked, glancing at the house behind him. Emily nodded, trying to mask her nerves with a confident smile. "I think it has potential." Brian didn't respond right away, but instead led her inside. The musty scent of mildew hit her immediately. The interior was dark, with old wallpaper peeling off the walls and hardwood floors that creaked underfoot. The kitchen was cramped, the cabinets yellowed with age, and the countertops were stained and chipped. Emily's stomach dropped. This wasn't like the polished houses she had seen on HGTV. But it was exactly what Greg had warned her about, properties that others would overlook, but with the right vision and investment, could be turned into something special. Brian continued talking, pointing out the obvious problems. The leaky pipes in the basement, the outdated electrical system, the cracked foundation. But Emily didn't hear most of it. She was already picturing the potential. She could see fresh paint on the walls, new flooring, a modern kitchen. It wouldn't be easy, but it could be done. When they finished the tour, Emily asked Brian for the price. "It's listed at $95,000, Brian said, his eyebrows lifting slightly. "But given the condition of the place, I wouldn't expect it to sell for much higher than that. It's a fixer-upper, to say the least." Emily's heart raced. This was it, the moment where her dreams either came to life or crumbled. $95,000 was a lot of money, but it was still within her reach. She had saved just under $10,000 over the past few months, working long hours and cutting back on every non-essential expense. The rest would have to come from a loan or a private investor, something she hadn't figured out yet. Her mind spun as she weighed her options. She could walk away and keep saving, hoping for a better opportunity. Or she could take the risk, push herself to her limits, and dive in headfirst. Greg's words echoed in her mind. Find the fixer-uppers. The diamonds in the rough. She exhaled, steeling herself for what came next. "I'll make an offer," she said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind inside her. Brian raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. "All right, but I'd advise you to be careful. This one's going to take a lot of work." Emily nodded. "I understand." As she left the house and headed back to her car, Emily's mind was racing. What had she just committed to? She had no experience, no real knowledge of how to renovate a house. But she had something more important, a vision. And she was determined to see it through. When she got home, Emily opened her laptop and started researching. She found a few online resources about home renovation and even a couple of local contractors who might be able to help. She wasn't sure how she was going to pull this off, but she had no choice but to try. The next day, Emily called the realtor to make an offer of $80,000, 15,000 below the asking price, given the house's condition. She knew it was a gamble, but it was all she could afford. Brian hesitated but finally agreed to submit the offer. It's low, but I'll see what they say. Emily spent the next few days on edge, checking her email constantly, waiting for a response. She couldn't stop thinking about the house, about what it could become. But what if they rejected her offer? What if she couldn't make it work? Finally, the call came. The sellers have accepted your offer, Brian said, his voice almost incredulous. You've got yourself a deal. Emily froze, her breath catching in her throat. It was real. She had done it. She had taken the first step. Her heart swelled with a mixture of excitement and fear. This was just the beginning. She had so much to learn, so much to do. But for the first time in her life, Emily felt like she was on the path to something incredible. She wasn't just dreaming anymore. She was making it happen. Emily sat at her kitchen table, staring at the paperwork in front of her. The ink had dried on her contract, and now the gravity of what she had just done settled in. She had bought her first house, a house that had been abandoned for years, a house that everyone had written off as nothing more than a fixer-upper. And now it was hers. But what did that really mean? She glanced at the photo of the house on her phone, a crumbling facade, overgrown weeds, peeling paint. It was far from the dream home she had imagined herself owning someday. But she had something far more valuable: potential. Greg Matthews had told her to see the hidden opportunities in places that others overlooked. This house was her opportunity, her ticket out of the life she had been stuck in for so long. But what now? What came next? She reached for her phone and dialed Greg's number. She needed advice, and there was no better person to call than someone who had been through the process before. Hey, Emily. How's it going? Greg's voice crackled on the other end, warm and reassuring. I bought the house, she said, trying to hide the mix of excitement and fear in her voice. It's official. I'm a real estate investor now. Greg laughed, a sound that eased some of her tension. Good for you, Emily. I knew you had it in you. Now, we've got work to do. Her mind raced. Okay, I know I have to renovate the place, but I have no idea where to start. What's my first step? Greg paused for a moment, as if thinking it over. First things first, get a contractor to inspect the property. There are things you can't see just by walking through the house. You'll need to know exactly what kind of work needs to be done and what it's going to cost. Emily felt a knot form in her stomach. A contractor? That was just another layer of complexity she hadn't thought about. But she pushed her fear aside. Got it. I'll make some calls. The following day, Emily sat in her car in front of the property, nervously checking her watch. She had called a few contractors, but only one had been available to meet with her on such short notice. Greg's recommendation, a guy named Tom Parker, who had been working in the area for years. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she knew this meeting would be a big one. Tom pulled up in a rusted pickup truck, his clothes worn and dusty from a day's work. He didn't look like the polished professional she had imagined dealing with, but there was something about his no-nonsense demeanor that made her feel like he was the right person for the job. Afternoon, Tom said as he stepped out of the truck. His hands were rough, calloused from years of labor. This place looks like it's seen better days. Emily managed a small smile, but her heart was beating faster than she wanted it to. Yeah, it's a bit of a mess, but I'm hoping to turn it around. I need your help to figure out what needs to be done. Tom nodded, walking toward the house. All right, let's see what we're dealing with. The next hour was a blur of measurements, notes, and technical jargon that Emily barely understood. Tom walked her through the house, pointing out the major issues: the crumbling foundation, the outdated plumbing, the electrical wiring that hadn't been updated in decades. "You're looking at some serious work here," he said as he ran his hand along the cracked ceiling. "This place is going to need a new roof, plumbing throughout, probably new wiring as well. And if you're planning on making it livable, you're gonna have to put in some drywall, redo the floors, and definitely modernize the kitchen." Emily nodded, trying to take it all in. This was more than she had expected, but Greg had warned her that it would be a lot of work. Still, she had to admit, part of her had hoped it wouldn't be this overwhelming. "So, what's it going to cost?" she asked, her voice tense. She had saved as much as she could, but money was tight, and she had no idea how much this kind of renovation would run her. Tom rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "For a job this big, you're looking at around $40,000, maybe a little more, depending on the materials and labor. You'll need permits for some of the bigger work, plumbing, electrical, and that can take time. But this house can be fixed up. It just depends on how much you're willing to invest." Emily felt a wave of panic rise in her chest. $40,000? She didn't have that kind of money. But she couldn't back out now. She had come this far. She had taken the leap. There was no turning back. "What are my options?" she asked, her voice tight. Tom seemed to consider it for a moment, then shrugged. "You could look into a renovation loan, or you could see if you can get a private investor on board. There are ways to make it happen if you're willing to work with the right people." Emily thanked Tom and promised to follow up with him once she figured out the financial details. But as she left the property, a cloud of doubt settled over her. Could she really do this? Could she take on a renovation that would cost more than she had in her savings? She spent the next few days calling around, researching different types of loans, and even looking into potential investors. She was determined to find a way to make it work. Emily wasn't the kind of person to back down, not now, not when she could see the potential in front of her. By the end of the week, she had managed to secure a renovation loan. It wasn't a huge sum, but it was enough to cover the majority of the costs. Emily felt a surge of relief as she signed the paperwork, knowing that she was one step closer to turning this property into something profitable. The following weeks were a whirlwind. Emily worked tirelessly alongside Tom and his crew, watching as the house slowly began to transform. The crew replaced the roof, fixed the plumbing, and installed new electrical wiring. Emily spent hours at the property each day, learning from Tom, asking questions, and taking notes. The house was starting to look better, but there was still so much to do. The kitchen was gutted and reimagined with modern appliances and sleek countertops. The floors were replaced with fresh hardwood, and the walls were painted in soft, neutral tones. Slowly but surely, the house was becoming something she could be proud of. But the true test was still ahead. Once the renovations were complete, Emily would have to sell the house. And that was where the real challenge lay. She had to make sure the house sold for enough to cover her costs and give her the profit she needed to move forward with her next project. As the final touches were put on the house, Emily took a deep breath. The end was in sight. She had done it. She had taken the first step toward changing her life. But would it be enough? Emily stood in the middle of the house, surveying the progress they had made over the past few weeks. The once dilapidated walls were now crisp and white, with modern light fixtures hanging from the ceiling. The musty odor was gone, replaced by the fresh scent of new paint and wood. Every room had been transformed. The kitchen sparkled with brand new appliances, and the hardwood floors gleamed under the soft lighting. It was unrecognizable from the rundown structure she had first bought. But as beautiful as the house was becoming, Emily's heart still raced with anxiety. The renovations were nearly finished, but she knew the hardest part was yet to come: selling it. She paced the living room, glancing at her phone. Her fingers hovered over the screen, unsure of what to do next. She had worked so hard, sacrificed so much, but now the stakes were higher than ever. If she couldn't sell this house for a profit, all of her hard work would have been for nothing. She didn't just need the money to keep going, she needed validation. She needed to prove to herself that she could do this. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Emily opened it to find Tom standing there, wiping his hands on his worn jeans. His weathered face broke into a smile when he saw the look of pride in her eyes. "It's coming along nicely," he said, looking around the living room with approval. "You've got yourself a solid house here, Emily." "Thanks, Tom. I couldn't have done it without you." She smiled, trying to mask the underlying tension. "But now comes the hard part, selling it. I don't know if I'm ready for this." Tom chuckled softly. "Ready or not, it's time. But you've got a good product here. Trust me, someone's going to fall in love with it. The trick is to find the right buyer." Emily bit her lip, considering his words. She knew Tom was right. She had worked hard, and the house was beautiful. But what if it wasn't enough? What if she couldn't sell it for the price she needed to cover the renovation costs and make a profit? Tom must have seen the doubt in her eyes. "Look, Emily, this is the point where a lot of people get scared. But you've done the hard part. Now it's time to trust your instincts. You're in a good market. With the right agent and some strategic marketing, you'll get the price you're looking for." Emily nodded, feeling the weight of his words. It was easy to get lost in the details, to worry about every little thing, but she had come this far. She couldn't afford to give up now. The next day, Emily met with a real estate agent, a woman named Clara who had come highly recommended. Clara was sharp, confident, and had a no-nonsense attitude. She took one look at the house and immediately began pointing out its strengths. "This is a great location," Clara said, walking through the living room. "The school district is top-notch, and it's close to shopping and parks. Plus, the updates you've made are exactly what buyers are looking for. Modern kitchen, fresh flooring, a move-in ready home. You've done a great job here." Relief washed over Emily as she listened. Clara's words were the validation she had been craving. "Thank you. I've worked really hard on it, but what if I can't get the price I'm hoping for?" Clara met her eyes with a firm look. "The market is solid, and this house is priced right for what it offers. I'd suggest listing it at $150,000. That's a competitive price for this neighborhood, especially with the work you've put into it. We might even be able to get a bidding war going, which could push the price higher." Emily felt a spark of hope. She had been expecting a lower price, and Clara's confidence gave her a glimmer of optimism. "I'll do whatever it takes to get the best deal." "Let's do it." Clara nodded. "We'll list it. But we need to stage it properly to make sure it stands out. Buyers need to see themselves living here, not just see it as a house. I'll bring in some staging furniture and make sure the photos are professional. We'll get it on the market in a week." A week later, Emily stood in the doorway of the house as Clara's team set up the final touches. The staging made the house feel even more inviting, as if it had been pulled straight from a magazine. The living room was cozy and stylish, with soft throws on the couch and a few plants placed strategically around the room. The kitchen gleamed with its new appliances, and the bedrooms were decorated to show off the space. Emily could hardly believe this was the same house. By the time everything was set up, the photos were taken, and the listing went live, Emily could barely contain her nerves. She hadn't realized how much she had invested emotionally in this project. This wasn't just about the money, it was about proving to herself that she could do this. She had put everything she had into this house. And now all she could do was wait. Days passed, and the showings began. At first, Emily felt a sense of pride every time a potential buyer walked through the door. She'd overhear them talking about how much they liked the house, how it was just what they were looking for. But when the offers started coming in, Emily's excitement turned into anxiety again. The first offer was lower than Clara had suggested. The second offer was a little higher, but still not where Emily had hoped. Clara remained calm throughout the entire process, keeping Emily grounded. "This is normal. Buyers often start low, but they'll come up. You've got to be patient." And patient Emily was. She continued to trust Clara's judgment and waited for the right offer. Finally, it came. The offer that she had been hoping for $155,000. It was $5,000 above the asking price, and it was from a young couple who had fallen in love with the house the moment they walked in. Emily's heart soared as she signed the paperwork. She had done it. The house had sold for more than she had hoped. She had made a profit, and the feeling of accomplishment was overwhelming. As she closed the door behind her for the final time, Emily couldn't help but smile. The house she had once feared would break her had instead been the stepping stone to something greater. She had turned a rundown property into a beautiful home, and in the process, she had found a new confidence. It was only the beginning. Emily leaned back in the chair, staring at the bank account balance on her phone. The numbers were higher than they had ever been. Her first real estate venture had been a success, and the $15,000 profit was proof that all the hard work, the sleepless nights, and the sacrifice had paid off. She had done it. She had made her dream of becoming a real estate investor a reality. But as she sat there, basking in the glow of her success, something in her chest tugged. It wasn't a feeling of satisfaction or relief. It was more of an unsettled feeling. What now? What was the next step? Emily had come so far, but the road ahead was still long. She couldn't rest on her laurels now. The real question was, could she do it again? Could she replicate her success and continue building a future in this industry? She placed her phone down, leaned her elbows on the table, and let out a sigh. "Focus, Emily," she muttered to herself. "You've got this." It didn't take long for Emily to decide on her next step. She didn't want to go back to her old life, working long hours at a job that drained her soul. The real estate game had awakened something in her. It had given her a sense of purpose, a new ambition. And the fact that she had made a profit on her first deal meant that she was more than capable of doing it again. She called Clara the next morning. Clara had been instrumental in helping her sell the house, and Emily trusted her expertise. "Clara, I'm thinking of buying another property," Emily said, her voice filled with determination. "Something bigger, maybe a multi-family unit. What do you think?" There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, and then Clara responded, her tone as professional as ever. "It's a great idea, Emily. But multifamily properties can be a bit more complicated. You'll need a larger budget, and there are more moving parts, tenant management, higher maintenance costs, and so on. But if you're ready, I can help you find something that fits your criteria." Emily took a deep breath. She had already come this far. She wasn't about to back down now. "I'm ready," she said firmly. "Let's do it." A week later, Emily found herself at a new property. This one was different from the first house. It was an old duplex in a prime location, right near a university. The potential was obvious. The neighborhood was filled with young professionals and college students looking for affordable rental units, and the area had a steady stream of people moving in. It seemed like the perfect opportunity for a buy-and-hold investment. The duplex was a bit worn down, but it had solid bones. The roof was newer, the foundation was stable, and the layout was ideal for renters. There was work to be done: new flooring, updated kitchens and bathrooms, and a fresh coat of paint, but overall, Emily saw the value. "I think this one could work," she said to Clara, who had accompanied her to the property. Clara nodded. "It's definitely got potential. You'll need to act fast, though. Properties like this don't stay on the market for long, especially in this area." Emily's heart raced. This was it. This was the opportunity she had been waiting for. She couldn't hesitate. "I'll make an offer," Emily said. "Let's get it done." A few days later, Emily found herself sitting across from the seller, negotiating terms. The duplex wasn't cheap, but the numbers made sense. She had managed to secure financing through a local bank, and with the profit from her first house sale, she had enough for the down payment. The deal wasn't easy, but Emily stayed calm and confident. She had learned from her previous experience, and now she was in control. She wasn't just a first-time investor anymore. She was someone who knew the ropes. Finally, after some back and forth, they reached an agreement. The duplex was hers. As soon as the deal was finalized, Emily threw herself into the renovation process. She hired a new team of contractors, making sure to vet them thoroughly this time. She also brought in an interior designer to help with the finishes, ensuring that the units would have the modern look and feel that renters craved. The process was faster this time around. Emily knew what to expect, and though there were still challenges, unexpected costs, delays with the permits, and the occasional miscommunication, she handled it all with a calm confidence she hadn't had the first time. The duplex took a little less than 3 months to finish, and when it was done, it looked nothing like the rundown building she had bought. Each unit was stylish, with updated kitchens, sleek appliances, and spacious living areas. The floors were polished hardwood, and the bathrooms had been transformed with modern fixtures. It was exactly what young renters were looking for. The next step was finding tenants. Emily had learned from her last experience that timing was everything. She didn't want the property to sit vacant for too long, and she knew that advertising the units properly would be crucial. She reached out to Clara again for help, and together, they worked to market the property. Within a few weeks, they had signed leases for both units. The rents were higher than Emily had anticipated, and the demand was overwhelming. The duplex had become the hottest property in the area, and Emily couldn't help but feel a sense of pride as she watched her new tenants move in. The next few months were a whirlwind. The rent payments started rolling in, and Emily was finally seeing the fruits of her labor. She was living in a modest apartment, but the steady income from the duplex allowed her to focus entirely on growing her real estate portfolio. She had a clear vision now. She was in this for the long haul. She even started attending real estate investment meetups, where she met others who were in the same business. Some of them were veterans with decades of experience, while others were just starting out, like her. Emily quickly found herself learning new strategies, hearing about the challenges others had faced, and making connections that would prove valuable in the future. Her confidence grew with every deal, and with every property she bought and renovated, she felt herself moving closer to her ultimate goal, financial freedom. But as the months went by, Emily realized something even more important than money. She wasn't just building a business, she was building a life. A life that she had created, a life that was hers, one where she called the shots, took the risks, and reaped the rewards. She had proven to herself that she could achieve more than she had ever thought possible. And this was only the beginning. Emily stood in front of her second property, the duplex, feeling an overwhelming sense of pride. The sign in front read, "Fully rented, available units," and she smiled, proud of what she had accomplished. The steady stream of rent payments from her tenants allowed her to take the next step. It was time to think bigger. She had learned so much from the first project, and even more from her second one. But there was one thing that Emily had yet to experience: the unpredictability of the market. While her first 2 deals had been smooth, the real world of real estate investing wasn't always as glamorous as it seemed. There would be bumps in the road, unexpected challenges that could potentially derail her plans. It was late one evening when Emily received an email from her property manager. The subject line was simple, but the contents inside made her stomach drop. Water leak in Unit 2. Serious damage to the ceiling. Immediate repairs needed. Her heart sank. Water damage in one of her rental units was one of her worst fears. Not only would it cost money to fix, but it could potentially set her back months in rental income. She immediately called her property manager, Jake, who answered on the first ring. "Jake, what's going on? How bad is it?" "Hey, Emily," Jake's voice was calm, but it didn't offer any comfort. "The leak's bad. The tenants in Unit 2 are complaining about a dripping noise coming from the ceiling, and it looks like the plumbing might be the issue. We've already put a tarp up, but it's going to take more than a patch job. We're talking about the potential for mold, and it's right above their living room." Emily rubbed her forehead, fighting the wave of panic that was slowly creeping in. She had worked so hard to get to this point, and now, out of nowhere, this setback had appeared. "How much are we looking at?" she asked, trying to remain calm. "Well, we'll need a plumber to check the pipes, and depending on the extent of the water damage, it could be anywhere between $1,000 to $3,000 in repairs. And that's if we're lucky. If there's mold, it could be a lot more." Emily swallowed hard. $3,000 was a huge hit, especially after she had just paid off some initial costs. But she also knew that the longer this went unaddressed, the more expensive it would become. If tenants started to complain, she risked losing them, and that would be even more costly in the long run. "Okay," she said with determination. "Get the plumber in tomorrow and assess the damage. We'll fix it, whatever it costs. We can't afford to have a major issue like this lingering." The following morning, the plumber arrived and got to work. Emily stood by, trying to keep her emotions in check as she observed the damage. The pipes were indeed the culprit, and it looked like they had been leaking for some time. Water had seeped into the ceiling and walls, causing significant damage. Emily listened to the plumber's assessment with a heavy heart. "You're looking at a major repair," he said. "We'll need to replace a section of the ceiling, cut open part of the wall, and fix the plumbing. It's a bigger job than we initially thought." The total estimate came to $4,000. Emily sighed, taking a deep breath. This was the reality of owning rental properties, the unexpected costs that could knock you off balance if you weren't careful. But Emily wasn't going to let this derail her. If anything, this was a test of her resilience, and she wasn't about to let it break her. "I'll take care of it," she said to the plumber. "Let's get started." Over the next week, the repairs were underway. Emily had to juggle multiple things at once, overseeing the repairs, coordinating with her tenants, and ensuring that the other unit remained unaffected. The situation was stressful, but Emily found herself becoming more adept at managing these sorts of challenges. Her ability to remain calm and keep the situation under control was a skill she hadn't realized she had until now. Her tenants, while inconvenienced by the repairs, were understanding. She kept them updated regularly and offered to reduce their rent for the month as a gesture of goodwill. They appreciated the communication and the quick action Emily took, and in the end, they agreed to stay. By the end of the week, the repairs were completed and the tenants were back to their routines. The ceiling was fixed and the plumbing had been completely overhauled. While the $4,000 price tag stung, Emily knew that it was an investment in the long-term viability of her property. More importantly, it was a reminder of the responsibility she now had as a landlord. A few weeks passed, and things started to feel like they were back on track. Emily's bank balance was stable, her tenants were happy, and she had learned a valuable lesson about the unpredictability of real estate. However, the experience left her questioning her next move. She knew she couldn't rely solely on the rental income from the duplex to build the wealth she wanted. She needed to scale faster if she truly wanted to reach financial independence. But that meant taking bigger risks, investing in properties that needed even more work, or even branching out into new markets. One night, as Emily sat at her kitchen table, poring over property listings and market data, she came across something that caught her eye. It was a fourplex in a neighboring town. The price was reasonable, the location was ideal, and while the property was in need of significant repairs, it seemed like a goldmine. Her fingers hovered over the phone as she considered the possibility. A fourplex could be a game changer. But she also knew it would come with new challenges, bigger renovations, more tenants, and potentially even more risks. She called Clara, the real estate agent who had helped her with her first 2 deals. "Clara," Emily said when she picked up, "I found something. A fourplex. It's got a lot of potential, but it's a fixer-upper. I'm thinking of making an offer, but I'm nervous. What do you think?" Clara was quiet for a moment, considering Emily's words. Then she responded with the kind of straightforwardness that Emily had come to rely on. "It's a big step, Emily. But if the numbers work and you have the right team in place to handle the renovations, I think it could be worth it. You've already proven you can handle a lot, and a fourplex will give you more rental income, which will help you scale. But make sure you're ready for the workload and the potential headaches." Emily nodded, even though Clara couldn't see her. The idea was starting to grow on her, and she knew that the only way to move forward was to take calculated risks. "I'm in," Emily said, determination clear in her voice. "Let's do it." Emily couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement as she paced back and forth in her small apartment, her mind racing with possibilities. She had just made the decision to take on her first fourplex, an investment much larger than anything she'd done before. The property was located in a neighboring town about 45 minutes from her duplex, but it was in a prime location near a thriving downtown area. It had enormous potential, but the amount of work it needed was significant. There were three things that kept running through her head as she reflected on the decision: the risk, the potential reward, and the undeniable truth that she couldn't grow her real estate portfolio without stepping out of her comfort zone. She had to go bigger, or she would always be stuck in the small league, making minor profits with each project. The fourplex was a solid brick building with 4 units, 2 on the ground floor and 2 above. It had been built in the 1970s and hadn't seen any major renovations since. The exterior showed signs of wear. The roof was sagging in places, and the interior was stuck in the past: 1970s wallpaper, outdated appliances, and chipped paint everywhere. But Emily knew that behind the peeling wallpaper and outdated fixtures was a diamond in the rough. She scheduled a meeting with Clara the next day to visit the property and assess whether it was truly worth the investment. Emily knew Clara had been through many property flips and renovations, and she valued her opinion. Together, they would make sure they were making a solid choice. As Emily and Clara stepped into the first unit, the smell of old carpet and mildew hit them immediately. The floors creaked under their feet as they walked through the living room, with its yellowed walls and an old fireplace that hadn't been used in years. But the layout was ideal. Each unit had 2 bedrooms and a full bathroom, with plenty of space for a small family or a couple of roommates. "I can already see the potential," Clara said, glancing around the living room. "This place needs a lot of work, but the bones are good. It's solid brick, which means low maintenance for the exterior. The roof, though, is going to be a bigger job." Emily nodded, mentally making a list of everything that needed to be done. The roof would have to be replaced, the floors redone, the kitchens and bathrooms updated, and all the units repainted. She knew it wasn't going to be cheap, but the idea of turning this property around was enticing. If she could fix it up and get tenants in, the rental income would be substantial. And with 4 units, she could spread out the costs and reduce the financial risk. "Okay," Emily said, taking a deep breath, "let's make an offer. But we need to factor in the repairs and renovations." The process of negotiating the price took a few weeks, but eventually, Emily and Clara were able to agree on a deal that worked. The seller was motivated to get rid of the property quickly, and Emily's offer reflected the costs she would incur to bring the building up to par. After some back and forth, the deal was sealed. Emily left the closing table feeling both elated and nervous. She had just bought her first major property, and she had a lot of work ahead of her. But she was determined to see it through. Over the next few months, the renovations began. Emily hired a contractor she had worked with before for the duplex repairs, and they started by replacing the roof, which was the biggest and most urgent issue. The workers tore off the old shingles, patched up the leaks, and replaced the roof with brand new material. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it was necessary. As soon as the roof was done, Emily and the contractor turned their attention to the interiors. The kitchens and bathrooms were gutted and replaced with modern fixtures. The old appliances were hauled away and replaced with energy-efficient models. The living areas were repainted with neutral colors that would appeal to a wide range of tenants. Every time Emily walked through the building, she felt the weight of the project on her shoulders. There were times when the renovations felt endless, dust, noise, and chaos every day. But she reminded herself of the end goal, a fully renovated fourplex with stable tenants, bringing in a steady stream of rental income. But the road was not without its bumps. About 2 months into the project, Emily received a phone call from her contractor. "Emily, we've run into a bit of an issue. There's mold in the walls in 2 of the units, and it looks like it's pretty deep-rooted. We're going to need to tear down part of the drywall and do a full mold remediation," he said, his tone serious. Emily's stomach dropped. She knew that mold could be a serious problem. It could not only delay the renovation, but also lead to additional costs. "How much is this going to add?" she asked, trying to stay calm. "We're looking at another $5,000 to $7,000 in repairs, depending on how much of the drywall needs to be replaced. It's going to take at least another 2 weeks to fix." Emily sighed. This wasn't what she had planned for, but it was part of the reality of investing in older properties. There would always be surprises. "Okay, I trust you," she said. "Let's take care of it." Despite the setback, the work continued. Emily threw herself into the project, managing the contractors, overseeing the budget, and even spending some evenings cleaning up the units herself. Slowly, the building transformed before her eyes. Each unit began to take shape, and the transformation was incredible. The old, worn floors were replaced with beautiful hardwood, the outdated kitchens were modernized, and the bathrooms gleamed with brand-new tiles and fixtures. The building, once an eyesore, was starting to look like something that could attract quality tenants. The final step was furnishing the common areas and putting up for rent signs. Emily was nervous but hopeful. With a prime location in the growing downtown area, she was confident that she could find tenants who would appreciate the work she had done. She just needed to get the word out. As Emily awaited the responses from potential tenants, she couldn't shake the sense of anticipation. This was the real test, the moment of truth. Would her hard work pay off? Would the fourplex attract enough people to make it financially viable? To her relief, the calls started coming in. People were interested in the newly renovated units. Emily had received several applications within the first week, and by the end of the month, she had signed leases with 3 tenants. The 4th unit, however, was still vacant. But that was okay. Emily reminded herself that patience was a virtue in real estate. With 3 out of 4 units in her newly renovated fourplex rented, Emily felt a sense of accomplishment. Despite the constant challenges and the unexpected costs, the property was beginning to turn a profit. She had made it through the toughest part, the renovations, and now the steady stream of rental income was on its way. But as every landlord knows, the job wasn't over once the tenants moved in. There were still many moving pieces, and Emily quickly learned that managing tenants was a whole new game. It was around the 3rd month after the fourplex's completion when Emily began to face the first real test of her patience as a landlord. It started with Lisa, the tenant in Unit 1. Lisa had been the first to sign a lease, a single mother with 2 young children. Emily had made sure to do a thorough background check, and everything checked out. Lisa seemed responsible until she wasn't. At first, everything was fine. Lisa paid her rent on time, and her children were quiet. But then, out of nowhere, Emily started to receive complaints from the other tenants. The complaints were about noise, loud music late at night, stomping around, and even yelling. Emily's tenants in Unit 2, a couple named Chris and Megan, were particularly vocal about it. Chris had approached her one evening to discuss the issue. "Emily, we really like living here, but it's hard to get a good night's sleep. We're woken up by yelling and loud music from Unit 1. It's every night," Chris explained. Emily sighed. She had been hearing the same thing from Megan. The situation had reached a point where she couldn't ignore it anymore. The next day, Emily knocked on Lisa's door. When Lisa answered, she had a nervous look on her face, almost as if she had been expecting this conversation. "Hey, Lisa," Emily said with a warm but firm tone, "I've been getting some complaints from your neighbors about noise." I just wanted to check in and see if everything's okay. Lisa seemed to deflate, her shoulders slumping. I'm really sorry, she said, looking embarrassed. It's just, the kids have been acting up a lot lately, and I've been stressed out. I didn't realize it was bothering the other tenants. I'll try to keep it down. Emily could tell that Lisa wasn't making excuses, but this wasn't something that could be brushed under the rug either. The complaints were serious, and they affected the harmony of the building. Emily knew she had to be firm. Lisa, I understand that things can get tough, but I really need you to keep the noise down, especially at night. It's important that everyone feels comfortable in their home, and I don't want this to escalate further. If it continues, I may have to take action. Lisa nodded, and Emily could tell she felt guilty. I'll do better, I promise. For the next few weeks, things were quieter. The complaints stopped, and Emily began to feel a sense of relief. She thought maybe the issue had been resolved. But just when she thought she could breathe easy, another problem arose. Megan from Unit 2 approached Emily one evening with a concerned look on her face. Emily, we need to talk. There's something going on with the plumbing in our unit, Megan said, gesturing towards the bathroom. The water pressure is horrible, and the shower is practically useless. We can barely get a decent stream of water. Emily's heart sank. Plumbing issues were never cheap, and after all the repairs she had already done, another fix was the last thing she needed. She immediately called her plumber, Greg, and set up an appointment to inspect the problem. Greg arrived the following morning and quickly assessed the situation. Looks like there's some sort of clog in the main line, Greg said, scratching his head. You're going to need to get it cleared or it'll continue to cause issues. It's not just affecting Unit 2, it could affect the other units too. Emily felt the familiar wave of dread wash over her. Plumbing issues were notoriously expensive to fix, and she was starting to worry if she had enough funds to cover everything. The last thing she wanted was another major, unexpected expense. How much are we talking about here? Emily asked. Well, to clear the main line and make sure everything is running smoothly, we're looking at around $2,500, maybe a little more, Greg replied. I'll get it fixed, but we need to do this soon before it becomes a bigger issue. Emily took a deep breath. This was the reality of being a landlord. There were always unexpected costs, no matter how well you prepared. But she also knew that if she didn't fix it quickly, it could lead to bigger problems with her tenants, and she couldn't afford to lose them. Okay, do it. Let's get it taken care of, she said, signing off on the repairs. The next few days were a whirlwind of contractors, noise, and stress as the plumbing was fixed. Thankfully, Megan and Chris were patient, understanding that these kinds of problems were beyond anyone's control. By the end of the week, the water pressure was back to normal, and Emily felt a small sense of relief. But Emily knew that managing the property wasn't always going to be this smooth. After all, she was now responsible for more than just fixing things around the fourplex. She had to ensure that everything ran smoothly, keep her tenants happy, and stay on top of ongoing maintenance. She would need to be proactive, stay organized, and keep an eye on the long-term picture. Emily took a step back to assess her situation. She was learning on the fly, and with every challenge, she grew stronger as a landlord. Managing tenants was no simple task, but it wasn't impossible. As much as the issues with Lisa and Megan had tested her patience, they had also taught her important lessons about communication, setting expectations, and the realities of property management. She thought about her next steps. Maybe she could hire a property manager to help handle the day-to-day operations of the building, freeing her up to focus on her next investment. Or maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to stay on top of everything herself. One thing was certain, Emily was determined to make this work. She had come too far to let a few bumps in the road stop her. As the weeks passed, the fourplex slowly became more stable. The tenants seemed happy, and Emily continued to juggle the responsibilities of being both a landlord and an investor. She realized that her life had changed in ways she hadn't anticipated when she first started out. She wasn't just building wealth, she was building a life. And that life, full of challenges, setbacks, and growth, was only just beginning. As the weeks passed, Emily's fourplex slowly transitioned from a chaotic project to a semi-smooth running rental property. The last plumbing issue had been resolved, and the tenants were finally settling in. But Emily couldn't shake the feeling that there was more she could be doing, more to learn, more to grow. The real estate world was vast, and although she had a few successful deals under her belt, there was so much more she didn't know. That's when she met Marcus. Marcus was an experienced real estate investor who had been in the business for over 20 years. Emily had met him at a networking event she reluctantly attended, dragging herself there after a long day of managing the fourplex. It had been one of those days where everything felt like it was going wrong. Tenants were upset, a small repair was needed, and she was mentally exhausted. Emily had gone to the event simply to check it off her to-do list, hoping she could meet some other investors who might offer advice or support. She never expected to meet someone like Marcus. He was standing near the bar, casually sipping on a drink and talking to a group of young investors. His demeanor was calm, yet authoritative. He exuded an air of confidence without coming off as arrogant. When their conversation shifted to property management, Emily couldn't help but listen in. She overheard Marcus talk about the importance of diversification, understanding market trends, and setting long-term goals. He made it sound so effortless, like it was second nature. Curiosity got the best of her, and Emily walked up to introduce herself. "Hi, I'm Emily," she said with a friendly smile. "I'm just getting started with real estate, but I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed. I'm trying to figure out how to take my investments to the next level." Marcus turned to her, his eyes sharp but warm. "Nice to meet you, Emily. What kind of investments are you working on?" Emily briefly told him about her duplex and the recent fourplex project, explaining the challenges she had faced along the way. She shared how she had done the renovations herself, learned the ins and outs of property management, and how she had dealt with tenants. Marcus listened intently, nodding as she spoke. When she finished, he paused for a moment, as if considering his words carefully. "You're doing a lot of things right, but you're also doing a lot of things the hard way," he said. "It's great that you're hands-on and learning by doing, but at some point, you'll hit a wall. Trust me, I've been there. If you want to scale up, you'll need to rethink your approach." Emily was both humbled and intrigued. "What do you mean? What should I be doing differently?" Marcus leaned in slightly, his voice low and thoughtful. "You need to think bigger, Emily. Sure, you've got a fourplex, but that's just the beginning. You're in the early stages, but you're already hitting those rookie bumps, plumbing issues, tenant complaints, unexpected costs. All of that is normal. But if you want to build long-term wealth, you need to be strategic. You need to learn how to work on the business, not just in the business." They ended up talking for over an hour. Marcus gave Emily insights into real estate investing that she had never considered before. He explained the importance of building a strong team, from contractors to property managers to accountants. He also told her about the power of networking with people who had been in the game longer, learning from their successes and failures. Most importantly, he talked about the mindset shift needed to grow in real estate. "You need to think of it as a business, not a hobby," Marcus told her. "A hobby will drain your time and energy. A business will give you freedom to scale, to create passive income, and to build real wealth." By the end of the conversation, Emily was both exhausted and energized. She knew she had just received some crucial advice, and the weight of his words settled in her mind. She could see the potential for growth, but she also realized that there was much more she needed to learn. A few days later, Marcus reached out to Emily. He invited her to join a small group of investors who met regularly to discuss their portfolios, share strategies, and support each other. Emily, eager to learn more, accepted his invitation. The meetings were eye-opening. Marcus wasn't just a mentor, he was a connector. He introduced her to a variety of professionals, real estate attorneys, mortgage brokers, and experienced investors. With each meeting, Emily's understanding of the real estate world expanded. She learned about different strategies: house hacking, flipping, and even commercial properties. She discovered how to evaluate deals more effectively and how to negotiate terms that would protect her interests. But perhaps the most important thing Marcus taught her was the value of patience. He emphasized that building wealth through real estate wasn't a sprint. It was a marathon. And while the hustle was important, strategic growth was paramount. As Emily's network expanded, so did her opportunities. She found herself looking at new properties, not just small multifamily units, but larger apartment complexes and even commercial spaces. The numbers were daunting at first, but with Marcus's guidance, Emily started to see how they could work in her favor. One of the first pieces of advice Marcus gave her was to stop trying to be everything in her business. She didn't need to handle every repair, every tenant issue, or every negotiation. Instead, she needed to assemble a team of experts, contractors, property managers, accountants, and attorneys who could help her handle the details while she focused on growing her portfolio. With Marcus's help, Emily made the decision to hire a property manager for her fourplex. At first, it was hard to relinquish control, but she quickly saw the benefits. The property manager took care of the day-to-day tenant communications, maintenance requests, and rent collection, leaving Emily with more time to focus on acquiring new properties and building her business. Weeks passed, and Emily's mindset shifted. She no longer saw real estate as a series of obstacles, but as a series of opportunities. She was thinking bigger, acting more strategically, and taking calculated risks. The lessons Marcus had taught her were beginning to sink in, and Emily was evolving into the kind of investor she had always hoped to become. Her fourplex was now fully stabilized, and the tenants were happy. The steady cash flow from the rental income was providing her with more financial freedom. Emily knew it was only a matter of time before she could use that cash flow to acquire more properties, take on bigger projects, and truly scale her business. As Marcus had said, this was just the beginning. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? With Marcus's mentorship and the lessons she had learned over the past several months, Emily's confidence in her real estate journey was growing. What started as a single fourplex was now transforming into a full-fledged investment strategy, and Emily felt like she was finally ready to take the next big leap. The question now wasn't whether she was capable, it was whether she was ready to tackle something bigger. It was a Wednesday afternoon when Emily received a call from her mortgage broker, Claire, with a lead that stopped her in her tracks. "Emily, I've got something you might be interested in," Claire said, her voice excited. "There's a small apartment complex, 8 units, coming up for sale in a great location. The seller is motivated, and the numbers could work in your favor." Emily's heart raced. An 8-unit building? She had never considered taking on something that large. Her fourplex had been a challenge, but manageable. Could she handle something that was more than double the size? But Claire's words echoed in her mind. The numbers could work in your favor. Emily had been preparing for this moment, slowly laying the groundwork for expansion, but she didn't expect to be presented with such an opportunity so soon. Her hand hovered over her phone, the weight of the decision pressing on her. "Tell me more," she said, her voice steady, though her mind was spinning with possibilities. Claire gave Emily the details. The building was in a well-established neighborhood, with a high demand for rental units. The property had been poorly managed for a few years, and many of the units were under-rented. The current owner was an older man who had inherited the property but had never fully maintained it. The rent was far below market value, and there were deferred maintenance issues, but Claire explained that the seller was offering a significant discount to move the property quickly. Emily immediately saw the potential. With a little work, she could bring rents up to market value, make the necessary repairs, and create a profitable investment. It wasn't a slam dunk, but the upside was substantial. "I'll take a look," Emily said, already feeling the rush of excitement and nerves. That weekend, Emily and Marcus visited the apartment complex. As they walked through the property, Emily could see what Claire had described. The units were outdated, the paint peeling, and there were signs of neglect throughout the building. But underneath the grime, she could see this structure had potential. The layout was spacious, the location was ideal, and the tenants seemed to be long-term renters who took pride in their homes, despite the shabby conditions. "I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's a fixer-upper," Marcus said as they stood in the hallway of the building, surveying the damage. "But these kinds of properties are gold mines if you know what to do with them." Emily nodded, taking in the advice. She could already imagine the upgrades, the new countertops, fresh paint, polished floors. The kind of changes that would immediately raise the property's value and rental income. "So, what do you think?" Emily asked, her voice tinged with both excitement and doubt. Marcus paused for a moment, looking around before meeting her eyes. "I think it's a great deal, but it's going to take more than just a little paint and some cleaning. You're going to need a solid budget for repairs, and you'll have to manage the tenants through the process. Are you ready for that?" Emily swallowed hard. She had handled the fourplex renovations on her own, but this felt different. 8 units meant more tenants, more coordination, more responsibility. "I think I can handle it," she said, trying to steady her nerves. "But I'm going to need help, especially with the renovations." Marcus smiled. "That's the key, knowing when to ask for help. You've come a long way, but scaling up is different. You'll need a contractor you trust, a property manager to handle the tenants, and you'll want to get a solid team in place. You can't do it alone." Later that evening, Emily sat at her kitchen table, reviewing the numbers. She ran the calculations over and over again, making sure she hadn't missed anything. The purchase price of the 8-unit building was lower than she expected, and after factoring in the cost of repairs and renovations, it still seemed like a good deal. The potential for increased rents would more than cover the expenses, and she could refinance the property once the upgrades were completed. But there were risks too. The property would take time and money to stabilize, and she would be taking on more debt. If she miscalculated or encountered unforeseen problems, it could set her back. Emily had learned the hard way that in real estate, timing was everything. But now, armed with new knowledge and a mentor who believed in her, she felt like she was ready. She took a deep breath and made the decision. She would put in an offer. The next week, the deal was officially in motion. Emily secured financing through Claire, who helped her navigate the loan process. Marcus continued to provide guidance, offering insights into the best renovation strategies to maximize return on investment. But as the sale progressed, Emily found herself juggling more than just the numbers. The seller was slow to respond to paperwork, and the process took longer than expected. She also needed to coordinate with her contractor to get a detailed estimate of repairs. It was a whirlwind of negotiations, paperwork, and logistics. But Emily embraced it. She knew this was part of the process, part of the growth she had been striving for. After what felt like an eternity, the deal was finally finalized. Emily was now the proud owner of an 8-unit apartment complex. The excitement that came with the acquisition was quickly tempered by the reality of what lay ahead: renovations, managing multiple tenants, and the constant balancing act of keeping the property profitable. Emily walked through the building once more, this time as the owner. The potential was still there, hidden beneath the surface of peeling wallpaper and cracked floors. She felt a surge of pride and excitement. This was a big step, and though the road ahead would be difficult, Emily was ready. As she sat in her car later that day, Marcus's words echoed in her mind. It's going to take more than just a little paint and some cleaning. The scope of the work ahead felt overwhelming, but Emily had faced harder challenges. And just like before, She knew that if she put in the effort, planned carefully, and surrounded herself with the right team, she could turn this building into another success. She was no longer the beginner who had been mocked for her small real estate dreams. She was becoming the investor she always wanted to be, and this was only the beginning. The excitement of acquiring the 8-unit apartment complex quickly gave way to the hard work that came with turning it into a profitable property. Emily had done renovations before, but this was on a much larger scale. The stakes were higher, the budget bigger, and the timeline tighter. The sheer scope of the project was daunting, but Emily had come to learn that real estate wasn't for the faint of heart. If she wanted to succeed, she had to embrace the challenge. The first step in her renovation journey was hiring the right team. Marcus had repeatedly emphasized the importance of surrounding herself with reliable professionals who could handle the intricacies of a larger project. Emily had already built a good relationship with her contractor, Greg, who had worked on her fourplex, but she knew this was going to be more complicated. She needed an experienced project manager who could coordinate everything and keep the project on track. That's when Emily met Sarah, a seasoned project manager with years of experience in commercial renovations. She had managed several large apartment building overhauls and had a reputation for staying under budget and on time, two qualities that Emily desperately needed. After meeting with her, Emily felt confident that Sarah could handle the complexity of the project. With Sarah in place, Emily began to tackle the long list of repairs and updates that would bring the building up to market standards. The units needed new flooring, updated kitchens, fresh paint, and upgraded bathrooms. The exterior needed a facelift, new landscaping, fresh paint, and a few structural repairs. There was also the matter of the parking lot, which was riddled with potholes and in desperate need of resurfacing. Greg and Sarah put together a detailed plan, breaking down each area of the building and assigning tasks to different subcontractors. Emily's role was to oversee the budget and timelines, but she still wanted to be involved in every step of the process. After all, this was her investment, and she couldn't afford to miss anything. The first few weeks were an emotional roller coaster. Emily would visit the property every day, watching as the workers ripped out old appliances, tore down walls, and tore up floors. It was messy, noisy, and disruptive. The tenants, who had lived in the building for years, were already nervous about the changes, and Emily found herself constantly having to reassure them that things would improve. "Don't worry, we're making the place better for all of us," Emily would tell them with a smile, though part of her wasn't so sure. The mess was overwhelming, and there were days when the noise and dust made it feel like the renovation would never end. Still, Emily knew this was part of the process. She had heard the horror stories from other investors, renovations that dragged on for months, budgets that ballooned out of control, contractors who disappeared mid-project. Emily didn't want to be one of those investors. She was determined to stay on top of everything and keep things moving forward. However, as the renovations progressed, things started to go wrong. It began with the plumbing. The building's pipes were older than Emily had realized, and as they started tearing things apart, they uncovered more and more issues. Pipes that had been improperly installed years ago were now leaking, causing water damage in several units. The problem wasn't just cosmetic, it was structural, and it had to be fixed before they could move forward with any other renovations. The cost to fix the plumbing was astronomical. Emily received multiple quotes, and the lowest one was still higher than she had budgeted for. She had to make a tough decision. Should she pull back and leave the plumbing as is, which could lead to even bigger issues down the road, or should she bite the bullet and pay for the necessary repairs? After a sleepless night, Emily decided to go ahead with the repairs. She had learned the hard way that cutting corners in real estate was never a good idea. If she wanted to build a long-term, profitable investment, she needed to make sure everything was done properly, even if it meant spending more money up front. As the weeks turned into months, Emily watched the building slowly transform. The old, dingy units were now fresh, clean and modern. The kitchens were outfitted with stainless steel appliances, the floors were a warm, light wood, and the bathrooms had been completely overhauled with new tile, fixtures, and vanities. The exterior of the building was repainted, the landscaping was redone, and the parking lot was resurfaced. The changes were nothing short of incredible, but Emily still had a long way to go. The building wasn't fully rented yet, and she had to get the tenants in place before the renovations were complete. One day, just as Emily was finishing a meeting with Sarah to discuss the next phase of the project, she received a call from one of the existing tenants. It was a woman named Linda, who had been renting in the building for over 5 years. She was one of the long-term tenants who had stayed despite the building's disrepair, but now, with all the changes happening, Linda was nervous. "Emily, I'm really not sure about all these changes," Linda said, her voice shaky. "I've been here for a long time, and I don't want my rent to go up. I just can't afford it. I'm worried I might have to move." Emily's heart sank. She had worked so hard to make the building better for the tenants, but now it seemed like her improvements were causing even more stress for some of them. She had to be honest with Linda about the market rent in the area, but she didn't want to lose her as a tenant. "Linda, I totally understand how you feel," Emily said, her voice soft. "But I want you to know that I'm going to work with you. Yes, the rents will go up, but I'm going to make sure they're still affordable. You've been a great tenant, and I don't want to lose you. I just need to make sure that the building stays sustainable, and for that, the rents have to reflect the improvements." After a long conversation, Linda agreed to stay on at a slightly higher rent. Emily promised to keep her informed throughout the process and to give her as much notice as possible about any future increases. The renovation process was not without its setbacks, but Emily had learned valuable lessons along the way. First, she had learned that she couldn't do it all on her own. She needed her team, from Sarah and Greg to the contractors, plumbers, and property managers. She also learned the importance of patience. Renovations never went as smoothly as you hoped, and things would always go wrong, but that was part of the journey. The building was far from finished, but Emily could already see the light at the end of the tunnel. She was getting closer to having a fully renovated, profitable property. She knew it would be worth it in the end, and this experience had already made her a stronger, more confident investor. As Emily stood in one of the newly renovated units, looking out over the city from the second-floor window, she felt a sense of accomplishment. The property was almost ready for tenants to move in, and she knew that this was the moment where everything could change. She had taken a huge risk, but it was beginning to pay off. She wasn't just a small-time investor anymore. She was building something real. With the renovations well underway, Emily felt a growing sense of accomplishment, but the next challenge was looming large: tenant management. The 8-unit building wasn't just a real estate project anymore, it was a community. Emily had spent so much time focusing on repairs and improvements that she hadn't given much thought to how to handle the diverse group of tenants living there. Some of them were long-term renters who had been living in the building for years. Others had moved in more recently. It was time to find a balance between keeping her current tenants happy while attracting new ones who would pay the higher rents that the upgraded building could now command. The first hurdle was addressing the concerns of the existing tenants, particularly those who had been living in the building before Emily bought it. They had been living in less than ideal conditions and were now faced with higher rents and a series of disruptions due to the ongoing renovations. Emily had done her best to keep everyone informed about the upgrades, but as things progressed, she realized that communication was more critical than ever. One morning, as she walked through the building, checking in with the contractors, Emily was stopped by Linda, the long-term tenant she had spoken with before. Linda had lived in the building for more than 5 years and was one of the original renters who had chosen to stay through the transition. Emily had promised her that the rent increase would be as manageable as possible, but Linda was looking more concerned than usual. "Emily," Linda said, her voice tense, "I appreciate the upgrades, but I just don't know if I can keep up with the rent increases. It's getting harder to make ends meet, and I'm worried I might have to move out." Emily's stomach tightened. She had worked so hard to create a better environment for everyone in the building, but she knew that the costs of the improvements had to be reflected in the rent. However, she never wanted to push anyone out, especially not Linda, who had been there through thick and thin. "I understand, Linda," Emily replied gently. "I know this is a big change, and I'm committed to making sure you can stay here if that's what you want. Let's sit down and work out something that feels fair to you." Linda nodded, but Emily could see the worry in her eyes. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing on her. As much as she wanted to help, the reality of the situation was that Emily had a business to run, and she couldn't afford to keep rents artificially low for everyone. Still, she wasn't going to lose sight of the personal relationships she had built with her tenants. After a few days of going back and forth with Linda, they came to a compromise. Emily offered a gradual increase in rent over the next few months, allowing Linda to adjust without feeling overwhelmed. It was a gesture of goodwill, but Emily also realized that she would need to take a more strategic approach in managing the rest of the tenants. The next challenge was filling the vacancies left by the tenants who had moved out during the renovations. With the new upgrades, the building was now more attractive, and Emily was confident that she could attract higher-paying tenants. However, the market was competitive, and Emily had to be proactive. She reached out to local real estate agents, made sure the property was listed on every rental platform, and even hosted an open house for prospective tenants. Within weeks, she started getting interest. People were excited about the newly renovated apartments, but the real test would be finding tenants who would not only appreciate the upgrades, but also pay the new rents. Emily had to carefully vet each applicant to ensure they were a good fit for the building, both in terms of reliability and attitude. One Friday afternoon, Emily was sitting at her desk when she received a call from her property manager, Sarah. "Hey Emily, I've got a couple of prospects who are really interested in your units," Sarah said, her voice upbeat. "They're both professional couples, and they love the renovations. They're asking about the rent and the lease terms, though. Are you comfortable with their offer?" Emily leaned forward, pulling up the application details. Both couples seemed like good fits, solid incomes, glowing references, and no history of late payments. Still, Emily couldn't help but feel nervous. If she got the wrong tenants, it could lead to more headaches down the road. "Let's move forward with one of them," Emily replied after a moment of thought. "But I want to make sure they understand the terms clearly before we sign anything. We're running a business here, not just renting out apartments." "Got it," Sarah said. "I'll make sure everything is clear, and we'll do the final walkthrough tomorrow." The lease signing for the new tenants went smoothly. Both couples were thrilled to move in, and their excitement was palpable when Emily showed them around. They were eager to live in a newly renovated space and seemed genuinely happy with the upgrades. Emily felt a rush of pride as she saw her hard work paying off. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of paperwork, finalizing lease agreements, and making sure the new tenants were settled in. But as Emily walked through the building, she couldn't help but feel like a true landlord, someone who was responsible for more than just the physical property, but also for the people who lived there. It was a lot of pressure, but Emily was determined to succeed. Despite her success in filling the vacancies, Emily knew there were still challenges ahead. She still had a few tenants who were unhappy with the rent increase and others who hadn't been as communicative about their concerns. She had to stay vigilant, ensuring the building remained in good condition while keeping her tenants happy and engaged. One afternoon, as Emily sat at the coffee shop down the street from the building, she thought back to when she had first started in real estate. She remembered how uncertain she had felt, how she had doubted her ability to succeed. Now, she was the owner of an 8-unit building, managing a group of tenants and learning how to balance the needs of both the property and the people living in it. Emily realized that this was the true challenge of real estate, managing people. The physical property was important, but the relationships she built with her tenants were just as critical. They needed someone who cared about their concerns, who could make decisions that were both fair and profitable. She was no longer just an investor. She was a landlord with a responsibility to her tenants. As she finished her coffee, Emily made a mental note of her goals for the next few months: streamline the management process, ensure the property stayed in top shape, and, most importantly, keep the lines of communication open with her tenants. As Emily settled into her role as both investor and landlord, things began to take a turn she hadn't quite anticipated. The building was filling up nicely with reliable tenants, and the renovations were nearly complete. But the world of real estate had a way of throwing curveballs when you least expected them. And this time, Emily found herself facing a challenge she hadn't prepared for. It all started with a phone call on a crisp Monday morning. "Emily," Sarah's voice was strained on the other end. "We've got a serious issue. There's been a water leak in one of the apartments, Unit 3. It's bad, and it's affecting the tenants in the 2 units below it." Emily's heart skipped a beat. She had heard horror stories about water damage from other landlords, but she hadn't expected this to happen so soon, not after all the work they had put into the renovations. "What happened?" she asked, trying to stay calm. "It looks like one of the pipes burst behind the wall. The leak's been going on for a few hours, so we've got significant damage in Unit 3, plus water damage to Units 2 and 1. I've already called the plumber, but we're going to need to do some serious repairs." Emily felt her stomach drop. The repairs were already costing her a fortune, and this unexpected issue was another setback. "How bad is it? How long will it take to fix?" "The good news is the plumbing's under warranty," Sarah said, but her voice was tinged with frustration. "The bad news is we'll need to tear down the walls in 2 of the units to fix the pipes. We might also need to replace the drywall, floors, and maybe even some of the electrical in Unit 3. It's going to be messy, and it's going to take at least a few weeks." Emily felt her pulse quicken. The last thing she wanted was more disruption for her tenants. She had already been through so much with the renovation, and now this. But there was no way around it. She had to act fast. "All right," Emily said, her voice steady despite the rising tension. "Let's get a contractor over there as soon as possible. I'll come by to assess the damage. Thanks for letting me know." As she drove to the building later that morning, Emily's mind raced. She had to figure out how to handle this. Her first priority was ensuring the tenants were taken care of. The last thing she wanted was for any of them to feel like they were being neglected. And then there was the issue of the repairs. This was going to cost more than she had initially planned. She had already stretched her budget with the renovations, and now she was faced with another massive expense. When she arrived at the building, she found the plumbers already on site. The damage was worse than she had imagined. Water had soaked into the carpet in Unit 3, and there was a visible stain creeping into the ceiling of the apartment below. The walls in both units were damp, and Emily could hear the sound of the contractors tearing down drywall to access the pipes. Sarah was there as well, and she walked Emily through the situation. "The leak came from an old pipe that we missed during the initial inspection. It wasn't visible until we started tearing down the walls to make room for the new fixtures. We'll need to replace all the pipes in the affected area and rebuild the walls. The floor in Unit 3 will also need to be replaced." Emily nodded, her thoughts swirling. She had no choice but to move forward with the repairs. She couldn't risk leaving the problem unresolved, but at the same time, the financial burden was becoming overwhelming. "Do we have any options for cutting costs here?" Emily asked, trying to find a solution that wouldn't bankrupt her. Sarah hesitated before replying. "We could use some temporary patching, but that would only be a short-term fix. The pipes would still need to be replaced eventually. If you want to do it right, it's going to cost." Emily ran her hand through her hair. She didn't want to take shortcuts. She had spent too much time and money making the property look great, and she wasn't about to let a hidden leak ruin everything. But the repairs would likely eat into her expected profits, and that worried her. After discussing the details with the plumber and the contractors, Emily decided to move forward with the full repairs. She also made arrangements to offer temporary housing to the tenants in the affected units. She would pay for their stays at a nearby hotel until the repairs were completed. It wasn't ideal, but it was the least she could do to keep them comfortable and show them that she was invested in their well-being. However, there was one more thing Emily needed to address: the potential damage to her reputation. As a relatively new landlord, she knew how important word of mouth could be. If her tenants were unhappy, it could lead to negative reviews, and that could affect her ability to attract new renters. That afternoon, Emily sat down to write a letter to all of the tenants in the building. She wanted to be transparent and honest about the situation. She explained the water leak, assured them that everything was being taken care of, and provided details on how long the repairs would take. She also included her personal contact information, encouraging tenants to reach out if they had any concerns. The next few weeks were a blur of repairs, hotel stays, and constant communication with her tenants. Emily checked in with each of them regularly, making sure they were comfortable and that the work was progressing as planned. As much as she hated the disruption, Emily found that handling the situation with care and transparency helped ease some of the tension. By the time the repairs were finally complete, Emily had learned some valuable lessons about the unpredictability of real estate. She had done everything she could to minimize the inconvenience for her tenants, but it was clear that things didn't always go according to plan. And yet, despite the setbacks, Emily's tenants were understanding. No one moved out, and the building was restored to its former glory, if not better. The leak had caused delays, but it also reinforced Emily's commitment to doing things the right way. As Emily stood in the hallway after the repairs were finished, she reflected on the experience. Real estate was never going to be easy. There would always be unexpected hurdles, always something that could go wrong. But she had handled the challenge with grace, and she had gained a deeper understanding of what it meant to be a responsible landlord. This setback, as frustrating as it had been, had only made her stronger. She was learning to navigate the unpredictability of the market, and each challenge brought her one step closer to becoming the kind of investor she had always wanted to be. The repairs from the water leak had finally been completed, and while the process had been grueling, Emily was proud of how she had handled the situation. But now, with everything back in order, there was a new challenge on the horizon, one that could make or break her real estate venture, securing a strong financial foundation to scale. Emily had always been a hands-on person, eager to tackle everything herself, from tenant relations to renovations, but she knew the time had come for her to think bigger. If she wanted to continue growing her portfolio and build the kind of legacy she had always dreamed of, she needed to take her investment strategy to the next level. The next step was clear: leveraging her current success to expand into new opportunities. It was an unusually hot morning when Emily sat down at her desk, trying to sift through a pile of financial documents. She had made it through the repairs, kept the tenants satisfied, and seen her building transform from a crumbling eyesore into a thriving property. But she wasn't satisfied. There was more she wanted to accomplish. Her thoughts drifted back to the moment when she'd first decided to invest in real estate. She had started small, just a fixer-upper that felt like a gamble, but now, looking at the success of her 8-unit building, Emily felt ready to take on something larger. The next step was securing the capital to expand. She had a couple of options at her disposal. She could either take out a loan, seek out private investors, or even look into partnering with other investors. Emily had been talking to a few people in the industry, trying to get a feel for the possibilities. But there was one conversation that stuck with her. Her friend Jason, who was a seasoned real estate investor, had told her about a networking event for real estate professionals that was coming up. It was an event where investors, brokers, contractors, and other industry professionals gathered to talk shop, discuss potential deals, and explore opportunities. Emily had been hesitant at first, feeling unsure about mixing with so many established professionals, but she knew this might be the breakthrough she needed. That evening, after a long day of checking on the tenants and coordinating with contractors, Emily decided to go for it. She reached out to Jason to confirm the details of the event, signed up, and prepared herself to step out of her comfort zone. The following week, she dressed in her best blazer, and with a mixture of excitement and nerves, she headed to the venue. As she entered the conference hall, Emily was struck by the scale of the event. It was buzzing with activity. Investors were exchanging business cards, brokers were discussing potential deals, and everyone seemed to know exactly what they were doing. Emily had been in the business for a while now, but standing in the midst of so many experienced professionals, she felt like a small fish in a big pond. But Emily was determined not to let her nerves get the best of her. She had worked hard to get here, and now she was going to make the most of the opportunity. She approached a few groups, introduced herself, and began asking questions about the current market trends. As the evening went on, she found herself having conversations with a few investors who seemed genuinely interested in her current project. They were impressed with her journey, particularly how she had handled the building renovations and tenant management. By the end of the event, Emily had gathered a stack of business cards and had even been invited to a follow-up meeting with a well-established real estate investment firm. One of the investors, Greg, seemed particularly intrigued by her success with the building. He had worked on similar projects and was looking for a partner to co-invest in multifamily properties. "I have to say, I'm impressed with how you've handled the property so far," Greg said, his voice low but sincere. "Most new investors struggle with tenant management or overestimate the costs of renovations, but you've kept it together. If you're interested, we should talk about potential opportunities in the future." Emily's heart raced as she took in Greg's words. This could be the opportunity she had been waiting for, a chance to grow her portfolio with a partner who could bring additional resources and experience to the table. But she wasn't going to jump in blindly. She needed to think carefully about the kind of partnership she wanted. In the days that followed, Emily reflected on the possibilities. Partnering with someone like Greg could provide the financial backing she needed to take on bigger projects. But she was cautious. Trust was crucial in any partnership, and she didn't want to lose the control she had worked so hard to gain over her current investments. She reached out to Jason for advice, as he had been in the business much longer than she had. Jason's advice was clear: do your due diligence and don't rush into anything. A good partnership can take your investments to new heights, but a bad one can bring everything crashing down. Take your time, Emily. Taking Jason's words to heart, Emily scheduled a meeting with Greg. She wanted to learn more about his investment strategies and how he envisioned the partnership working. The meeting with Greg was enlightening. He outlined his approach to real estate investment, buying properties in high-growth neighborhoods, fixing them up, and then flipping or renting them for long-term gains. He had a strong network of contractors and property managers, and his track record spoke for itself. Emily was impressed, but she was also keenly aware of the risks involved. As they discussed potential deals, Emily realized that the more they talked, the more she saw how their visions aligned. Greg wasn't just interested in making quick profits, he was focused on long-term growth, just like she was. They agreed that they would start by jointly investing in a smaller property before scaling up to larger projects. Emily left the meeting feeling a sense of relief. She hadn't rushed into anything, but she had found a potential partner who seemed trustworthy and knowledgeable. They had agreed on terms and set a plan to explore potential properties in the coming months. In the weeks that followed, Emily found herself balancing her existing properties with the excitement of her new partnership with Greg. It wasn't just about making money anymore. It was about building a legacy, creating opportunities, and growing with someone who shared her vision. As she stood outside her 8-unit building one evening, watching the sunset over the city, Emily couldn't help but smile. She had come so far since that first dilapidated property, and now she was on the verge of something even bigger. The challenges she had faced to the repairs, the tenant management, the financial hurdles had only strengthened her resolve. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was thriving. Emily knew that the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but she was ready for whatever came next. After all, every great journey begins with the courage to take the first step. With her partnership with Greg in place, Emily was now poised to take a major step forward in her real estate journey. The next challenge would be finding the right property to invest in together. After months of studying the market, analyzing trends, and scouting potential neighborhoods, Emily and Greg finally agreed on a promising property. An old apartment building in a gentrifying area that had a lot of potential but was in desperate need of renovation. It was a cool Wednesday afternoon when Emily and Greg met at the property. The building was a 5-story structure that had been abandoned for over a year, its windows boarded up and the front gate covered in graffiti. The neighborhood had once been a thriving hub, but years of neglect had taken a toll. Despite its dilapidated appearance, Emily could see the bones of a great investment. Greg was already walking around the property when she arrived, nodding as he looked over the building. "This one's got potential," he said, his tone thoughtful but confident. "The location is perfect, just a few blocks from the upcoming subway extension and new retail developments. The numbers make sense too. We can get it at a good price, and once it's renovated, it'll be a goldmine." Emily surveyed the building as well, mentally running through the possibilities. She could already picture what it could look like with new paint, modern appliances, and fresh landscaping. The units, while small, had an old-world charm with high ceilings and hardwood floors, things that could be restored with a little effort and investment. But the reality was that this building was far from turnkey. There were major structural issues. The plumbing needed to be completely replaced, the wiring was outdated, and the roof had leaks. It would be a huge undertaking. Emily hesitated for just a moment. She had already faced so many hurdles in her real estate journey, and this project would be the most ambitious one yet. Greg caught the hesitation in her eyes. "I know it's a big leap, but trust me, this is how we scale. We buy low, fix it up right, and sell high or rent it out for solid, long-term cash flow. This area is set to boom in the next 5 years. We'll be ahead of the curve." Emily took a deep breath. She had been playing it safe for too long, carefully managing her 8-unit building and ensuring everything was running smoothly. But real estate wasn't about playing it safe. It was about taking calculated risks. She had already seen how her smaller property had turned around with some hard work and a good strategy. If she wanted to grow, this was her chance. "I'm in," Emily said, her voice steady. "Let's do it." With the decision made, Emily and Greg moved quickly. They made an offer on the building, and after some negotiation, they secured the property for a price that was well below market value. Emily couldn't believe it. She had just taken the leap into a much larger project, one that would require not only financial investment, but also time, energy, and an entirely new set of skills. Over the next few weeks, they assembled a team of contractors, architects, and designers to start work on the renovation. Emily knew this would be a long, drawn-out process, but she also knew it would be worth it. The property had so much potential. Once it was revitalized, it could completely transform the area. As the renovation began, Emily found herself facing challenges that she hadn't anticipated. The project was moving slower than expected. There were unforeseen complications with the building's foundation, and every time they uncovered something new, it seemed like there was another major repair to be made. The expenses were piling up quickly, and Emily started to worry. She knew that Greg had more experience with large-scale projects, but that didn't make it any less stressful. Every time she walked through the site, the scope of the work seemed to grow. One afternoon, Emily sat down with Greg to review the numbers. "Greg, we're starting to exceed the initial budget. We might have to cut some corners or reconsider some of the upgrades we planned. Greg leaned back in his chair, a calm look on his face. I know it's tough, but we need to keep our eye on the long-term gain. If we start cutting corners now, we risk compromising the whole project. This property is in a prime location, and once it's finished, it's going to be worth every penny. Emily nodded, trying to steady her nerves. I know, but it's still a lot to take on. We need to be smart about how we move forward. Greg smiled. We've got this. It's a big challenge, but the reward will be bigger. Think of it like this. This is where we're going to make our mark. Despite the challenges, Emily kept pushing forward. She visited the site regularly, checking in with the contractors, making sure everything was on track, and staying involved in every decision. The renovation was grueling work, and there were days when it felt like the project would never be finished. But Emily's vision kept her going. She could see the building as it would be. Modernized, vibrant, and full of life. In the midst of the renovation chaos, Emily also focused on the financial aspect of the project. She worked with a team of accountants and property managers to ensure the budget remained as tight as possible. They applied for grants for the building's historic preservation, which would help offset some of the costs. But even with the financial juggling, Emily knew this was the turning point she had been working for. She had taken a massive risk, and now she was all in. 3 months later, the building began to take shape. The new roof was in place, the plumbing and wiring had been completely replaced, and the units were starting to look like real homes. Emily stood in one of the newly renovated apartments, looking out the window at the surrounding neighborhood. The changes to the area were already becoming visible, the subway extension was moving forward, new shops were opening, and there was a palpable energy in the air. The building wasn't just another property, it was becoming a symbol of what was possible. This was the type of investment that could change everything for her. The work was far from over, but Emily knew that this was the foundation of something bigger than she could have ever imagined. The hard work had paid off. She was no longer just a small-time investor. She was becoming a force in the industry, with a vision and a team behind her. And with each step, she was learning that the bigger the risk, the bigger the reward. The day had finally arrived. Emily stood in front of the newly renovated apartment building, her heart racing with excitement and nerves. It had been nearly 6 months since she and Greg had first decided to take on this massive project. In that time, the building had transformed from a dilapidated, abandoned structure into a modern, vibrant complex ready for new tenants. The graffiti-covered walls and broken windows were now replaced by fresh paint, polished hardwood floors, and sleek, high-end finishes. Emily had always envisioned this moment, the day when all the hard work would pay off and the property would come alive again. But it wasn't just about the building. It was about proving to herself, and to everyone else who had doubted her, that she had what it took to succeed in this industry. She'd learned a lot throughout this process about construction, about managing contractors, about juggling budgets and timelines. But more importantly, she'd learned about herself. She had faced challenges she never expected, and had sometimes felt like she was in over her head. But with Greg's guidance and her determination, she had pushed through, and now it was time for the world to see what they had created. Today was the day of the official unveiling, the open house where potential tenants, real estate agents, and even some investors would come to see the property. As Emily stepped inside the lobby, she marveled at how far the building had come. The lobby, once dark and dingy, was now bright and welcoming, with polished marble floors, contemporary lighting, and vibrant artwork on the walls. The new mailboxes gleamed, and a few fresh potted plants added a touch of life. She had made sure to focus on every detail. First impressions were everything. Greg was already there, greeting some of the attendees. "Looking good, Emily. I think this is going to be a hit," he said with a smile. His confidence made her feel a little better, but the nerves were still there. "Thanks, Greg." "I really hope so," Emily replied, forcing a smile as she glanced around. Everything feels so real now. I can't believe how far we've come. Greg chuckled. It's incredible. You've done great work. You should be proud. Emily didn't have time to dwell on the compliments. She had a lot to do. There were several prospective tenants who had already expressed interest in the apartments, and she needed to make sure everything went smoothly. As the open house began, more and more people filled the lobby. There was a buzz of conversation, and Emily could sense the excitement building. Potential tenants toured the apartments, inspecting every detail, chatting with the real estate agents, and expressing interest. The first couple of units had been rented almost immediately. Some of the prospective tenants had fallen in love with the character of the building and the high-end renovations. By the end of the open house, nearly half of the units had been taken, and the remaining ones had interest from several different parties. It was clear that the gamble had paid off. Emily stood off to the side for a moment, trying to take it all in. The excitement, the success, it was overwhelming. She had done it. She had taken a risk on a property no one else would touch, poured her heart and soul into the renovation, and now she was seeing the fruits of her labor. But even in the midst of her joy, Emily knew this was just the beginning. There was still much to do. Now that the building was rented, the real work would begin, managing tenants, keeping up with maintenance, and ensuring that the property stayed profitable. Greg found her standing alone in the corner of the lobby. "You did it, Emily," he said, giving her a proud pat on the back. "This is going to be a game changer for both of us." "Thanks, Greg." "I couldn't have done it without you," Emily said, her voice thick with gratitude. Greg smiled. "Well, you've got the vision, and you've got the grit. You've made this work." They stood together for a moment, watching as people continued to fill the building, some signing leases, others admiring the renovations. Emily felt a wave of pride wash over her. This was the moment she had worked for. She had proven to herself and to the world that she was capable of achieving more than she had ever imagined. But even as the building came to life with new tenants and fresh opportunities, Emily was already thinking ahead. This was a huge step, but there were still challenges to face. The market was unpredictable, and the road ahead was anything but guaranteed. She knew that, in order to truly succeed in real estate, she had to continue learning, adapting, and pushing herself further. Over the next few weeks, as the building stabilized and the tenants began settling in, Emily turned her attention to the next phase of her plan. With the building generating steady income, she now had the funds to start looking for her next property. She had learned valuable lessons from this first large project, lessons that she would carry with her into the future. Emily knew that the key to success in real estate wasn't just about finding the right properties. It was about building strong relationships with people, including investors, contractors, and tenants. It was about building a reputation for being reliable, trustworthy, and committed to long-term success. But as Emily began to strategize for her next move, something unexpected happened. One of the tenants, Lisa, a young professional who had moved into one of the renovated units, approached her with a proposition. She was an experienced real estate agent and had been following Emily's journey closely. "I've been really impressed by your work, Emily," Lisa said one evening as they bumped into each other in the building's lobby. "I think you've got an incredible eye for properties, and I'd love to talk to you about possibly partnering up for future investments. I've got access to some off-market deals that could be great opportunities." Emily's eyes widened. She hadn't expected an offer like this, but it seemed like a natural next step. She had always considered partnering with others to expand her portfolio, but she hadn't yet found the right fit. This could be the beginning of something big. "I'm definitely interested," Emily replied, her mind racing with possibilities. "Let's set up a meeting and talk more about it." As Lisa left the lobby, Emily couldn't help but smile. She had just completed one chapter of her real estate journey, but now another door was opening. The opportunities seemed endless. As Emily sat down that evening, Reflecting on everything she had accomplished, she realized that this was only the beginning. There would always be new challenges to face, new lessons to learn, and new risks to take. But she was ready for it all. She had already come so far, and nothing was going to stop her now. It was early morning, and Emily sat at her kitchen table, sipping coffee and reviewing the email from Lisa. They had agreed to meet later in the day to discuss the potential partnership, and Emily couldn't help but feel a buzz of excitement. After all the struggles and risks, her hard work had paid off. The building was thriving, her tenants were happy, and now she had the opportunity to expand her empire even further. She quickly ran through a list of possible questions for Lisa in her head. What were the off-market deals she had access to? What kind of partnership did Lisa have in mind? How would they divide responsibilities? Emily wasn't one to rush into things without careful consideration. She knew that choosing the right business partner was as important as choosing the right property. Trust, integrity, and shared values were key. But beyond the business side of things, Emily was feeling something else. This was her chance to push herself beyond what she thought she was capable of. She was no longer just a small-time investor. She was becoming a serious player in the real estate game. By the time Lisa arrived at Emily's apartment, the morning fog had cleared and the sun was shining through the windows. The energy in the air felt different, as if Emily was about to step into a new chapter in her life. Lisa was punctual, as always, and walked into the apartment with a warm smile. "Hey, Emily," she greeted, holding up a folder filled with paperwork. "I'm really excited to talk to you about this. I've been following your journey, and I think we could do some amazing things together." Emily smiled back. "Thanks for meeting with me, Lisa. I've been thinking a lot about the possibilities too. Let's dive in." The two women sat down at the dining table where Emily had laid out a notebook and her laptop. Lisa began flipping through the folder, pulling out documents, maps, and property listings. "These are some off-market properties I've come across recently," Lisa said, laying out the papers. "These aren't listed publicly, so we can negotiate better prices before anyone else gets a chance. I've been working with a few investors in the area, and I have strong relationships with developers, contractors, and even the local government. We could really leverage all that to get great deals." Emily looked over the properties Lisa had presented. Most of them were older buildings, much like the one she had just renovated, but they were located in up-and-coming neighborhoods, with plans for infrastructure development in the near future. The potential for profit was clear. "I can see the potential in these," Emily said, tapping one of the listings. "But what kind of partnership are you thinking? Are we talking about joint ventures or something more long-term?" Lisa leaned back in her chair, considering the question. "Well, I think we could start with a few joint ventures. Smaller projects to see how we work together. If everything goes well, we can talk about scaling up and doing something bigger. I think you'd bring a lot to the table with your eye for design and management, while I can focus on sourcing properties and handling negotiations." Emily nodded, liking the sound of it. This was an opportunity to grow without taking on too much risk at once. And Lisa seemed to have the experience and connections to make it work. "I'm in," Emily said, after a brief pause. "Let's start small, but let's make it count." Lisa smiled widely. "You won't regret it." Over the next few weeks, Emily and Lisa worked on their first project together, a historic apartment complex in an area near a new tech hub. The building was over a century old, with beautiful, intricate details but in dire need of a complete overhaul. The kind of property Emily loved. The negotiations went smoothly. Thanks to Lisa's network and Emily's knowledge of construction and design, they managed to acquire the property at a great price. With a clear plan in place, they moved quickly, assembling a team of architects and contractors who could handle the scope of the renovation. Emily was particularly excited about this project because it was a true blend of the old and the new. She knew how to respect the history of the building while modernizing it for today's tenants. It was a challenge she was eager to take on, especially with Lisa by her side. Together, They made a great team. Lisa had the connections and the business savvy, while Emily had the eye for detail and the operational know-how. As the weeks went by, the property began to take shape. Emily spent most of her days on site, working closely with the contractors and overseeing the renovation process. Lisa handled the business side, financing, marketing, and negotiating with potential tenants. Emily was learning a lot from her, especially when it came to how to scale efficiently. A couple of months into the project, Emily took a step back and reflected on how far she'd come. She had started out with a small building in a low-income neighborhood, and now she was working on multiple properties in prime areas. The transition had been challenging, but it was also incredibly rewarding. She thought about her first building, how much it had meant to her when it was completed. That was her foundation. But now, Emily was no longer just a beginner. She was a serious real estate investor, ready to take on bigger challenges and make a bigger impact. She picked up her phone and texted Greg, "We're doing it. We're scaling. This is just the beginning." Greg's response came quickly, "I knew you'd get here. Keep pushing, Emily. You've got this." A few days later, Emily sat in a cafe with Lisa to discuss their next steps. They had just completed the first project together, and it had been a resounding success. The building was fully rented within weeks of completion, and they had made a substantial profit from the project. "It's been amazing," Lisa said, sipping her latte. "The work you did on the property was incredible. I can't wait to do more with you." Emily smiled, feeling a deep sense of accomplishment. "Thanks, Lisa. It's been a pleasure working with you. I think we're just getting started." Lisa nodded. "Absolutely. We've got the experience, the network, and the skills. We just need to keep finding the right opportunities and making smart moves." Emily couldn't agree more. She had spent so much of her early career proving herself, but now she was in a position where she could play the game on her own terms. There would be no more doubting her abilities. She had the confidence, the resources, and the right people by her side. And as she looked out the window, watching the busy city street below, Emily knew one thing for sure: the real estate world was hers for the taking. The real estate market had been booming, and Emily was riding high. With the success of her first few partnerships with Lisa, she felt like she was on top of the world. The properties were filling up quickly, and the projects were running smoothly. Emily had finally found her rhythm, managing multiple projects at once without feeling overwhelmed. She had become the kind of investor she'd always dreamed of: respected, savvy, and driven. But as anyone in the business knows, the real estate market can be unpredictable. One afternoon, as Emily was finishing up a meeting with a contractor about a new project, she received an urgent call from Lisa. "Emily, you need to hear this." Lisa's voice was filled with anxiety. "There's a new development in the market, and it's big. Really big. The city's just announced that a huge corporate office park is going up right near our most recent project. It's going to drive rents down in the area. We might need to rethink some of our current strategies." Emily's heart skipped a beat. She had seen how quickly things could change in real estate, but this was unexpected. She had put a lot of work into positioning her properties in areas where demand was strong. If rents were going to drop due to an oversupply of office space in the area, it could throw a wrench in her plans. "I'll need to see the official announcements and market projections," Emily said, trying to remain calm. "Let's meet and figure out how to pivot." The next day, they met at a local coffee shop, the weight of the situation settling in the air between them. Lisa pulled out a few reports detailing the city's new development plans, including the office park that would add thousands of square feet of commercial space. That much new construction in the area would likely draw businesses away from the residential properties Emily had invested in. "We need to be prepared," Lisa said, her voice steady but concerned. "We've got a few properties in this zone, and if rents start to drop, we might face vacancies, or worse, tenants who won't renew leases." Emily nodded, her mind already racing through possible solutions. This was a test, a chance to prove her ability to adapt. We can't just sit back and wait for it to happen. We need to act now, Emily said, her voice firm. Let's schedule a meeting with the property management teams and discuss our options. We can adjust our marketing, maybe even start offering incentives to long-term tenants. Lisa agreed, but she had a question that had been weighing on her mind. And if that doesn't work? What's our backup plan? Should we start looking for new properties in other areas? Or should we try to sell off some of the existing ones? Emily paused. Selling wasn't an option she wanted to consider yet. She had worked too hard to build this portfolio, and selling at a loss would be a blow. But at the same time, she knew that real estate was about flexibility and taking calculated risks. Let's try everything we can to make the properties work, she said. But if things don't improve, we'll explore selling off some underperforming units. Let's keep our options open. The following weeks were a whirlwind of meetings, strategy sessions, and intense focus on every single detail of her properties. Emily's team worked tirelessly to come up with creative solutions, including offering tenants lease extensions at fixed rates, organizing neighborhood events to attract interest, and boosting the property's appeal with upgraded amenities. But even with all the proactive measures, Emily knew that the situation was still precarious. She had been through enough ups and downs to know that the market was a force she couldn't control. But what she could control was her response. And she wasn't about to let one development project ruin everything she had worked so hard to build. One evening, after a particularly long day of meetings, Emily sat alone in her office, reflecting on how far she had come. There were times when she doubted herself, especially when she faced situations like this. It was easy to get discouraged, to feel like everything was out of her hands. But she had built a solid foundation, and she knew that setbacks were a part of any successful journey. In that moment of stillness, Emily made a decision. She would not allow this challenge to define her. She would tackle it head-on, using all the skills and lessons she had learned over the years. She wasn't going to back down. She wasn't going to let this development project steal her momentum. "I'll get through this," she whispered to herself. "I've faced worse." By the time the next month rolled around, Emily had gathered enough data to make some difficult decisions. The rents in the area were beginning to soften, and several tenants had voiced concerns about the new office park taking away from the neighborhood's charm. It was clear that their strategies were working, but not as quickly as they had hoped. In a final effort to stabilize the situation, Emily called a meeting with her most trusted investors to discuss potential next steps. She needed to be upfront about the challenges they were facing, and she needed their support. As the investors sat around the table, Emily laid out the facts. The new development was a threat to their existing portfolio, but they still had time to adjust. She proposed a few alternatives, redirecting resources to other properties in areas with higher demand, adjusting the focus of marketing efforts, and even exploring a new development project in a different neighborhood. Look, the real estate game isn't just about having a perfect run. There will always be things we can't predict, Emily said confidently. But we can control how we react. We can adapt, and we can make sure we're positioned to thrive, even in the face of adversity. After a few tense moments of discussion, the investors nodded in agreement. Emily's leadership had gained their respect, and they trusted her judgment. As they left the meeting, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that this challenge had pushed her to the brink. It had forced her to reconsider her strategies, test her resilience, and prove that she was capable of facing the unknown. In many ways, this crisis had made her stronger, more focused. The market would continue to shift, and more challenges would arise. But one thing was clear: Emily was no longer the beginner she once was. She was a seasoned investor, ready to take on whatever came her way. The phone call came in the middle of the afternoon, a time when Emily usually took a moment to catch her breath between meetings. She glanced at the screen and saw Lisa's name. Given the events of the past few weeks, she knew it wasn't just a casual check-in. "Hey, Emily, Lisa's voice was urgent but calm. We need to talk. Something's happened, and we have to make a decision fast. Emily's pulse quickened, her mind immediately going to the worst-case scenario. What's going on? Lisa hesitated for a second. The company behind the office park development. They're pulling out. The deal's been called off. For a moment, Emily didn't speak. The news felt too surreal to process. After everything they'd been through, after all the worry and strategic adjustments, it was all suddenly off the table. Wait, you're serious? Emily asked, still trying to wrap her mind around it. How? Why? Apparently, there's been a shift in the market, Lisa explained, her voice growing more animated. The economy's not as strong as they projected, and they're rethinking their plans. The office park won't be going up, at least not anytime soon. Emily leaned back in her chair, the weight of the past few weeks lifting off her shoulders. The news didn't just remove the threat, it offered her something more valuable: opportunity. This is huge, Lisa, Emily said, after a moment, her thoughts quickly turning to the next steps. We need to act fast. We can't sit around waiting for the next problem to pop up. Let's push forward. We'll rework our strategy and start scaling even faster. Lisa laughed, a breath of relief escaping her. That's what I like to hear. I knew we could count on you to stay focused, no matter what. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Emily and Lisa regrouped, and instead of retreating, they doubled down on their previous plans. The properties they had been worried about were suddenly in prime locations, now free of the threat of oversupply. The market might be uncertain in some areas, but Emily knew this would be the moment where her ability to adapt, think quickly, and take calculated risks would truly shine. They immediately set out to acquire new properties, looking for undervalued buildings in areas just outside the city's current hot zones, places that had potential to develop but weren't yet on the radar. Emily's mind raced with possibilities. This could be the moment she'd been waiting for, her chance to solidify her position and expand her portfolio exponentially. It wasn't long before Emily found herself negotiating a deal for a large building in an up-and-coming neighborhood. The property had been abandoned for years, but it had great potential. The price was low and the market in the area was ripe for development. Emily and Lisa knew that, with the right renovations and management, this could be a gold mine. But as she signed the deal, Emily knew she had to be careful. Scaling too quickly could expose them to new risks, and the last thing she wanted was to lose control over the projects she had fought so hard to bring to fruition. We need a solid team in place, she said, as they finalized the acquisition paperwork. Let's make sure we're all aligned on the long-term vision here. I'm not taking any shortcuts. Lisa nodded in agreement. We'll make it happen. We've learned a lot from our previous projects. This is just the beginning. With the new properties in place, Emily and Lisa focused on bringing them to life. They assembled a dream team of designers, architects, and contractors, each a specialist in their respective fields. Emily had learned over the years that having the right people around her made all the difference. Every small detail mattered, from the initial designs to the marketing strategies, all the way down to the tenant experience. They threw themselves into the projects, each one a fresh opportunity to prove themselves again. The team worked tirelessly, renovations, paperwork, negotiations, all happening in sync with the clock ticking. Emily's role had evolved from a hands-on investor to a visionary leader, guiding each project from concept to completion. By the time the renovations were done, Emily had transformed not just a few buildings, but entire neighborhoods. The areas she had chosen to invest in were now flourishing. The tenants loved the upgrades, the amenities, and the sense of community Emily had worked hard to build. But as the months passed and the market continued to grow more competitive, Emily began to reflect on how far she had come. She had come from being mocked as poor, underestimated at every step, to now standing at the top of the real estate world in her city. And it was all thanks to her unwavering determination, her ability to adapt, and the relationships she had built along the way. She thought about her family, who had once doubted her friends who had supported her, and Lisa, who had become not just a business partner but a trusted ally. One quiet evening, Emily found herself sitting in her office, overlooking the city skyline. It had been a long day, but the view reminded her of how much she had achieved. She picked up her phone and called Greg. "Hey, Greg," she said, smiling to herself. "I think it's time we take this to the next level. Let's start looking for new markets. I want to see just how far we can go." Greg's voice was warm with pride. "I knew you had it in you, Emily. Whatever you want to do, I'm with you." As she ended the call, Emily felt a sense of peace settle over her. The journey had been filled with obstacles, risks, and sacrifices, but every challenge had shaped her into the person she was today. She had built a legacy that wasn't just about properties or profits, but about resilience, vision, and the courage to keep moving forward. In the end, it wasn't the triumphs that defined Emily's success, nor the failures that had threatened to break her. It was the lessons learned in both moments, the determination to rise after every fall, and the unwavering belief that no matter how the world saw her, she would always keep moving towards something greater. The city's skyline glittered below, a symbol of the empire she had built, and she was just getting started. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?